How's it going, guys? Chris here. Today we're going to be watching a video on how to prepare for the recession that will last forever. It's pretty grim. Obviously, Australia is starting to creep into a recession. If not, we've already been in a recession the last couple of years. And let's hear what she has to say.
We are awaiting the last ever recession. If you've seen some of my other videos, you'll know that one of my goals is to share
Also, full link will be in the description below.
My understanding of the ticking time bomb that is modern industrial civilization. Within our boom and bust, growth-reliant economies, it's only a matter of time before another recession occurs. But in the context of over-leveraged debt, inflation, increasing inequality, climate change, biodiversity loss, resource scarcity, and pollution, I think there will come a time when we have a recession and we never get back to where we were before. In this video, I'm going to look at some of the popular advice that's out there for planning and preparing for a recession, see if this applies to the inevitable last ever recession, and if not, provide you hopefully with some guidance on what I think could be done to increase your preparedness. With recessions and depressions that have occurred in the past, there's always a bouncing back. There is an assumption that our stock portfolios will increase again given enough time. And we see this in the data. After every blip downwards, which causes great harm and suffering to people, we bounce back up and end the cycle using more and more energy and resources and causing more environmental destruction. Because, as we now know, there is no way to power a growing, industrialised, consumer capitalist society without stuffing up the planet. And because of that, the cycle of growth and recession cannot physically continue forever. The evidence
From what I'm understanding is, once the last recession happens, well, I think you're going to be a little bit less worried about money and whatever, because I think a lot of people are going to go homeless. A lot of people are going to, lose their jobs. And I don't think, money is going to save you from a lot of the hurt that will happen, right? I think there'll be a lot of violence if it actually does end up happening. And people aren't going to be happy, and a lot of people are going to die probably. During a recession, it's tough enough, and for it to get to a real deep, dark depression type, situation that we'll never recover from, that's, I don't know, like that's the end of society in my books, to be honest. Do I think we'll probably ever get to that point? Oh, fuck, probably. I hope not in my lifetime, but the way things are going at the moment, where there's just so much greed and corporate greed and government ridiculous spending and overtaxation and mismanagement of everything, the world is probably going down that path. But hopefully we're, the managed decline as we've been in for the last, 10 or 20 years, can manage it for long enough that I'm not around for it. Hopefully.
we have points to the collapse of this cycle within the next few decades, certainly within my lifetime. This means we have a recession coming, or more likely a depression, which is a larger, longer, quantified version of a recession, from which the economy will never recover. Advice abounds on how to prepare for a recession, as well as how to recession-proof your life. I've had a look at a few, and they boil down to the same handful of pieces of advice. Let's get into it. The first point on many of these lists is to have an emergency fund or build up your emergency fund. They say contribute to an emergency fund, have sufficient emergency reserves. During a recession, it gets harder to get credit, so it will be more beneficial to you to have cash set aside for a rainy day fund in case.
But I will say that's assuming that the banks let you take your money out and spend it, right? Obviously, there'll have to be some sort of spending, because otherwise, if there's no spending, the economy completely disappears. Like, there has to be spending money. But obviously, if there's a depression, especially with how much debt every country is in and how much household debt Australians in particular have, the bank's not going to have the money to, they're going to be asking people for money. And these people aren't going to have it because house prices have gone down or whatever. So I don't know. What I'm thinking is when she says like a full on recession, depression type thing, I'm thinking the world's going to bloody end. Like it's over. Obviously it could, not be that bad in that situation. Then an emergency fund is obviously like a no-brainer. Like you should have enough money to last yourself, preferably 12 months, if not 3 months at least. In normal circumstances, in 3 months, you can normally get another job and get back on your feet. In a recession, potentially 3 months, you might struggle to get a decent job for, 6 to 12 months, depending on how bad it is, obviously.
There are unexpected expenses. To be honest, this is just good personal finance anyway, if you have the ability to put money aside like that. We can reframe this tip as be in possession of money. It should be noted that in times of hyperinflation, having money won't mean as much as it does now. Another tip I saw is to stockpile cash. I consider this as similar to having an emergency fund. Interestingly, taking money out of the stock market and having it sit in cash, if done by enough people, will crash the stock market and is part of what happens during a recession. But as an individual, if you want to own something that isn't going to go down in value, you can have cash sitting around.
Yeah, except we've seen in the last, 3 years where with inflation, and most likely what will cause a recession is, just inflation in general and lack of consumer sentiment and fear in the market. Cash will probably, yes, there'll be some sort of value of cash, but cash inherently loses its value, right? And more banks are actually stopping you from getting cash out. I think Commonwealth Bank is completely, or not completely, but they're really pushing their customers to stop using cash, because at the end of the day, a cash society is expensive to run compared to a cashless society. However, that takes a lot of the control out of the consumer, and you are giving up your money in a sense to these banks.
We can also reframe this tip as be in possession of money in a certain format. The third tip I see a lot is to live within your means. This means to spend less money, which again, interestingly, is what happens in a recession anyway. The advice is often to see if you can live off one partner's income if you are in a relationship. I do this with my husband. We have always planned our lifestyle around only requiring one income to get by. This has made it easier for one of us to be studying at uni, or to start a business like I have, or to stay at home with our kiddo, which both of us have done. We work very hard to do this, but we are also very fortunate to have had careers and a lifestyle that allows for this. Many people work full-time, with both partners working full-time, and are still just making ends meet. Next, there's a recommendation to have additional income. Some suggest that you should get a second job or...
See, I think all of this is more or less preparing for a recession, right? During a recession, right, it's going to be hard enough just to get a standard job, right? And work's going to, slow down a lot for many people, and a lot of people will lose their jobs. So just to even have a job is a good start, right? So to even think about getting a second job during a recession is very, I think, unbelievable and unrealistic. These are steps that you should be taking before a recession, so that you are, you have the extra capital and money there for if you do lose your job, if, shit hits the fan, you have that money there, compared to if you start doing this during a recession, it's almost too late, right? I think at the moment, technically Australia is not actually in a recession currently. It's in a per capita recession, basically just because we're importing. We've got way too many immigrants coming into the country. And yeah, it's just lowering the wealth per person. So now is a good time to be making extra money if you can, and really buffering up your savings just in case shit does hit the fan. There's a potential chance that, because everyone's predicting a recession, it doesn't happen, right? Like it's, that Warren Buffett quote where like, be greedy when others are fearful, and fearful when others are greedy. At the moment, a lot of people are fearful. So is this potentially a golden time to be an investor? It's hard to say. Like it really doesn't seem like it. But, everyone's worried about what's happening. The government's spending too much money, house prices are insane, too many people are coming into the country, job market starting to slow up. There's a lot of factors here that are sort of signing us up for a recession.
Side hustle or a freelancing gig to spread out your income streams, as it were. They also suggest looking at developing your career. One article says to start the job search before you need to in case you lose your job. These tips can be understood to mean get more money and prepare to lose your incoming money. The next few tips are for the investors among us. They say to invest for the long term. Don't worry about the shorter term fluctuations unless you're nearing retirement age. This is linked to another tip that they give, understanding your risk tolerance as well as diversifying your investments. This is also related to risk tolerance and spreading out your risk. But in a recession, pretty much all industries are connected and decrease in value across the board. So although this is good advice within the scope of general investing, I don't see it having much effect on the majority of people and their ability to get through a recession. Let's also not forget that the vast majority of stocks are held by people in the highest percentage of income earners. There are recommendations to keep a high credit score. This more applies to other countries than Australia, but incorporates not having a lot of debt as well as paying your bills and debts on time.
I think that's just a general life lesson that everyone should be taking into, advice that you shouldn't be holding on to debt unless a mortgage, car loan. Yeah, it's not ideal, but it's reality these days that everyone has a car loan. Obviously, it's not the most financially responsible decision, but everyone has one, so it is what it is. Those are the two, and HEX debt, I guess those are the three that people have. But, during a recession, you should be trying to pay that down as much as you can. And potentially, if stock prices are low and you have that extra income, it's potentially a good time to buy assets because as we saw during COVID, there was that massive, correction down and then it went flying up with government spending, right? And during that time, what happened was the richer got way richer and the people without assets became even poorer. And that's, at the end of the day, that's how it works. If you don't invest and, act like a rich person, you're not going to become rich, and it is what it is, eh?
They say prioritize getting out of debt. Focus on paying off debt. This is made much easier if you have more money. If you have no money to pay off your debts any faster than you already are, or if you are having to go into more debt because of a life situation, then this tip obviously isn't possible for you. One thing I want to add as we work through this is that if you don't fare well in the next recession, or if you lose your job or your financial situation goes belly up in a big way, please know in all likelihood it isn't your fault. This system is designed to work this way. It is designed to have swings back and forth caused by big business, big banks, and the government making decisions to protect themselves above all else. The policies and values that determine how our economy works are based on giving the people who already have money more money and not on ensuring that everyone's needs are met.
That's what I love. I love it how, people that don't understand money and what's going on, and they're the people that are, obviously in the lower class, they're, or even middle class, and they expect the government to help them and actually subsidize them and, pay for their rent or whatever, forgive their HEX debt, all these things, right? But yet the government inherently is greedy and will, protect their own and protect big business and bail out big business while they let the individual suffer, and the hardworking Australians they don't care about, right? And they're the people that rely on the government most of all, that expect the government to actually help them, but yet they won't. So if you want to, be on the safe side, be prepared for this stuff, you need to be working more hours, saving more money, and have a plan in place for if you lose your job. Can you work off living off one income or not, right?
If you find yourself struggling, whether during a recession or otherwise, please know that you are not the only one and the cards are stacked against you. The system is built by the wealthy for the wealthy, and there's nothing you or I can personally do to change that. Finally, we have the most useful tip, which comes from the Equifax website. Make an effort to stay on top of your financial situation. Okay, that's just vague enough to be meaningless, so let's focus on other advice. So it seems as if being recession-proof boils down to having a lot of money, spending less money, protecting the money you do have, and owing less money to others, a lot of which is not within our control. How much money we have and owe is influenced by where we grew up, our family, our inheritances.
I don't believe that's true, right? I think at the end of the day, yes, you have 100% control on how much money you owe and make, right? That is the two things you can control, right? You can either, get extra hours, you can work another job, you can upskill your job, you can start a business, you can pay down your debt so you don't owe people as much money, you can refinance, you can do all these different things, you could, I don't know, there's infinite amount of ways to control your money. So to say that you're, shifting the control away from you is not helping anyone, right? At the end of the day, people got to realize that they have full control of their money. Yes, obviously they might have families and expenses and all these things, which they have to pay. But they can control, the excessive amount of spending. They can control how much money comes in. These are all things you can control, 100%.
Our employer, market conditions, and many other things that are not something that we choose or something we only have a minor influence over. But what does that mean for those of us who are already living paycheck to paycheck, or who don't have the means to build up a decent emergency fund or step away from all debt anytime soon? This is where taking individual action to bolster yourself against economic downturn falls flat because of the systemic conditions I just described. And community resilience is where it's at. Community resilience doesn't get as much airtime as personal finance hacks, probably because it doesn't sell products or it doesn't neatly fit into a checklist. But it's one thing that has consistently helped people survive and recover from economic catastrophes throughout history. During the Great Depression, people shared housing, pooled resources, started cooperatives, and leaned into mutual aid instead of relying on government handouts. And in the face of what could be a recession that we don't bounce back from, these strategies are going to matter more than ever. So what does community resilience actually look like? It starts small, knowing your neighbours, participating in mutual aid groups, forming childcare swaps or food co-ops, supporting local businesses. It means building systems where we're not dependent as much on the decisions of other faraway board members or the whims of global stock markets. Acting on the conventional advice for preparing for a recession as an individual or a couple may help you personally to weather the storm. And it may mean that you get the new job over someone else who was also laid off. But when we focus only on our individual survival, we end up as part of a society that is isolated and vulnerable. This isn't...
And that's what the society we live in is currently. Like, all those things are real nice and they probably would work really well, but it's really hard when, especially the younger generation, we don't communicate with each other. Like, there's no neighborly anything anymore. And during a recession, I guess that is really important. Especially if you could just share rent with someone. Even now when rental prices are crazy high, like having roommates and stuff, that just would cut costs from, $600 a week down to, $250, $300, something more attainable, suitable, affordable, right? Especially when you're making, anywhere from $1,000 to $1,500 a week after tax. That's actually affordable and reasonable, right? Anyway, I do agree with quite a few points on this one, but at the end of the day, like, everything said here is just stuff you should be doing, in your general life before a recession anyway, to make sure you are in a good financial situation. And, putting the focus on yourself is definitely important. But that'll be it for me, guys. And if you enjoyed, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Later.